Hi, everyone, and welcome. Happy Tuesday. There you go. Absolutely. Happy Tuesday. We're going to wait for our participants to continue joining. And as we're joining, as usual, if you've attended any of these webinars, we always want to know who's joining us. So if in the chat, you could put where you're joining us from and what role you have within your district or within your school, we'd love to hear from you. This is so fun to see where everyone's joining from, right, Karen?
Definitely.
It's one of our favorite parts, thinking about all the, at least it is for me, because I'm always thinking about the warm spots that people say they're not, because I am not in a warm spot.
Absolutely. And it looks like we have participants from Wisconsin, North Carolina, Baltimore. I love this.
Across the coast to coast, I see us here today.
Absolutely. Oh, look, we even have someone from Louisiana.
I love it.
Great. And it looks like we'll give everyone about 15 more seconds to sign in.
Hi, Megan. I saw a hi, Megan, in the chat, Megan. So there's somebody out there.
Oh, yes. I know Susan very well. Worked with her. Pennsylvania. Hi, Susan. In Texas. Awesome. Well, you know what, Karen? It looks like we've got people, like you said, from coast to coast joining us. And that is one of our favorite things to do, is find out where everyone's joining from. And so we just want to welcome you to today's literacy presentation. We're really going to dive into assessment and intervention today. And so as you're continuing to share, oh, look, there's your warm place, Karen, Maui. We have a participant from Maui. As you continue to share where you're joining us from, we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves for those of you who this is your first time joining one of our science of reading webinars. And so just a couple reminders before we do move forward. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see the chat button, which is where we're asking you to drop in where you're from. Should you have questions throughout today's presentation, the Q&A button down at the bottom is where you can put those questions. If you put them there, we'll either answer them live if we don't get an opportunity to do that, or respond to you either live or via the Q&A box. Then we'll follow up with you after this webinar. And then we also have, you can turn on your closed captions. There should be a little bar that pops up asking you to do that. So Karen, with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll let you introduce yourself first. I've done enough talking already.
All right, thanks, Megan. Happy to be here today. I'm Karen Venditti, and I live outside of Chicago in Northwest Indiana. I've been working with Amplify's teachers and partners for over 7 years now, and it's exciting to continue to be able to do that. And I met folks just like Megan in the field, working with high quality instructional materials built on the science of reading. And so that's how Megan and I met and got to continue this journey, doing our webinars and sharing our love of this research with all of you. And so, Megan, to share your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you couldn't already tell, I am from the South. I'm actually from South Louisiana. So when I saw Louisiana pop up, I was like, yay. But my name is Meagan Molbert, and I'm actually a former elementary teacher. The majority of my classroom experience was spent in those K-2 years. And, you think about these years, and these are really those foundational years where you're laying the groundwork for students' reading proficiency. These are really critical years. And it was through this experience of implementing a different core program that I kept thinking, oh my goodness, what's going wrong? Why am I not moving the needle forward? Also, am I assessing the right skills? All of those things. And it was through that journey, or through that experience, that I came to learn about Amplify's core program, where I became an Amplify CKLA teacher, and from there joined the Amplify team. And that's actually where I met Karen, who she calls me Laverne. She is my Shirley, and we love jumping on these webinars together, because to us, it's about spreading the good news about the science of reading and that growing body of research, but also Amplify's tools that really help you make putting the science of reading into action achievable, all of the high quality instructional materials. And so Last week, if any of you were part of our Amplify Reading webinar with the science of reading, connecting that to the science of reading, we started out with this. Obviously, it's no shocker to anyone on the call. You deal with it on a daily basis. Not only are your kids coming to you with lacking the social development or the social skills that they've come to you with in the past this year, so you're dealing with that, but also there's an even bigger gap, right? And maybe it's caused from the learning loss from the pandemic, or maybe you're just really having trouble with, identifying their needs. What instruction have they had? What instruction have they not had? And so we're seeing in our DIBELS 8 data, even with MCLASS, that there are even more kids who are, at risk for reading failure. But that's really nothing new, even just from the pandemic. Sure, we have our own set of issues or new challenges, I would say, with maybe kids not functioning as far as in the classroom as well, but it really started decades ago, right, Karen?
Definitely. And as you know, if you have heard Meagan and I talk, we talk about the NAEP data because it is something that is new, and it's something that we really kind of have to keep an eye on. We want to make sure that teachers have the tools to be able to change this trajectory for their kids. And so as we look at NAEP data, and there was a recent discussion around the scores fell even more recently. And so we want to share today some aligned tools, a complete literacy system to be able to help you help your students so that we can change this.
And this is where we always kind of begin and kind of level setting. One thing the pandemic has definitely done is drawn more awareness to districts evaluating their literacy system. Because we as educators know that a strong literacy program or system, a complete literacy system, it's not just about your core curriculum or your assessment or your differentiated practice, all of those things working in silos. What we're seeing is that as districts become more informed about the science of reading and they're starting to really evaluate these pieces of the literacy system, that the focus then becomes, we need to make sure that our assessment is measuring the critical skills, that our core instruction is using science-based research to actually, during our core block, to make sure that students are receiving high quality grade level instruction. And also when students are out of reach, how are we really differentiating their instruction and practice? And so it's about bringing all of these together and all of these key components together and really grounding them in that body of research. And so, how do we even really look at data? Because today's all about data and assessment, but how do we really even, determine students' needs from day to day? Because let's face it, when you're in the classroom, I'm sure you can relate to this, the challenge is the day to day. How do I make informed decisions? And so we really have to look at the role of data in a complete literacy system to understand this. So when we talk about data in a complete literacy system, the purpose of it should be, there's many different purposes, but overall it should be, it should be determining your overall health of your literacy system. And that can really start with core, right? Am I seeing that my core is reaching the biggest number of students? Is it effective? Am I moving the needle forward for all kids with grade level skills? But also that data should actually help you plan your small group instruction within the core and also outside of the core as well. So how are we really using that data to determine our small group instruction and provide really targeted remediation as well? And then also it can also be used to determine personalized independent practice and instruction as well. So really placing students on a path, a personalized learning path. So in addition to that though, so we talk about, how data really determines the overall health, how it's identifying those kids who are at risk, and then giving, placing the, or identifying, like skills deficiencies, or kind of giving you a place to begin with really providing targeted remediation. But also something else that's really important is that instruction that we're using to remediate the skills deficiencies that our data system is making apparent, that instruction has to be, grounded in science of reading practices as well. So using explicit systematic instruction, really providing that targeted those targeted activities to close that gap or that skills deficiency. But one thing that we'll, really look at with our data system today is how are we determining how effective our remediation instruction is? And that's really where progress monitoring comes in to determine if students are making adequate progress, and also is our instruction really meeting the needs of closing their skills deficiencies. And thankfully, Amplify has a complete literacy system that's grounded in the science of reading research. And so when we talk about this in relation to Amplify today, in relation to assessment and remediation or intervention, we're going to be looking at MCLASS. And MCLASS actually is our platform that administers universal screening and dyslexia screening. And that's actually what's identifying what students' needs. It's going to determine the overall health of Amplify CKLA. And also Karen's going to walk us through some of the features of MCLASS that actually provides targeted small group instruction in an effortless way for teachers, as well as places students into Amplify Reading's personalized learning path. And so Karen, I love that we can sit here and talk about this complete literacy system and really show this continuation across all pieces of our literacy system in such a cohesive way. And so I'm excited for you to begin to share this.
Sure. So, and some of you who have been in our previous webinars may recognize some of the images here, because these are all pieces that we've talked about in that interconnected way. That complete literacy system is going to have those tools that work together. And we're going to start today. We're going to work on the assessment side of that and talk about our MCLASS assessment tools. But if on our previous call, you know that CKLA, the instruction aligns to what we are assessing. And so you want to make sure you're assessing what you're instructing. And well, if students do have deficiencies, we want to intervene. We want to remediate exactly where we need to based on that instruction and those skills, as Megan's talked about, that are so necessary to become a proficient reader. At the same time, last week we talked about Amplify Reading and those games those worlds that kids are going to explore and have fun will reinforce those things that we're working on with the instruction, with the assessment, but independent of us, so that we know they're working on the right things, those targeted things that we are, those targeted skills that we are really highlighting.
Yeah, and you know what, Karen, I'm going to actually just share a personal story with this. When we really started to implement a strong core with our core instruction, looking at even chaining here, right? Developing word awareness, being able to manipulate individual phonings. This is such a critical skill for kids. And we realized that our assessment that we were using at the time wasn't assessing this, and we knew that this was such a critical skill. And so I love that MCLASS, or the image we see on the left, is actually doing exactly that. So we can see that they're going back and forth here. And just the word city, it's just such an easy thing for teachers to have the seamless approach with making sure kiddos are receiving that digital instruction as well. And that kind of goes into this segue of the high quality assessments and what those critical skills are. So I'm excited for you to jump into this.
Exactly. And so how do you know? That's the question. How do you know that what you're assessing in terms of the system that you're using or the tools that you're using are addressing and aligned to those critical skills that Megan's talked about from core instruction? So that's what you want to be looking for. Are the skills that I'm assessing, are they aligned to what I'm doing in the core? Are they sound? The research behind them, is there that depth of understanding of why these skills are what they are needed to be assessed, and are they developmentally appropriate for our kiddos? Do we assess in grade K the same things that we're assessing in the upper grades, or do we know that at different ages the risks are different depending on what our skills our students have? And so we want to make sure that those things are all being addressed through that system. And again, what are we doing to make sure that everyone has access to that data? First, making sure it's simple, and we are providing that simplicity for teachers so that they don't have to, spend inordinate amount of time trying to figure out what assessments do I need to use? How are they addressing some of the skills that I'm trying to work on in the core? It's transparent for teachers. They really trust it. because they are the ones that are administering it. They are not relying necessarily on a system to do that. They know that those active skills that students are demonstrating are the things that they need to see for proficiency in reading, and everyone has access. Everyone has access to that because of the kinds of data reporting systems that work within a classroom, within a school, within an entire district.
So that's why we're really going to dive into MCLASS, our universal literacy screener and dyslexia screener, to help you understand how this tool can really identify what your kids know, right? Assess where they are, even at this point in the year, and give you the data that you need to inform your instruction, to make those informed instructional decisions, like where do students begin and amplify reading, and is our core effective? And so Karen's actually going to take it away and really jump in live here to show you how easy this is, and also the data that MCLASS Dibbles 8th edition provides you, and all of those critical skills that are so necessary to determine if students are at risk for reading failure, and if they are, give you that path to really providing that targeted remediation.
All right, so Megan, if you let go of your screen, I can grab it.
Sure.
Great. We're going to jump a few slides there. As Megan shared, we're going to hit upon what MCLASS is. And so MCLASS, first of all, I don't know, you can put it in the chat if anyone knows what that stands for. I'm just going to cut to the chase. It stands for mobile classroom. And so we've been working with this mobile classroom for over 20 years. So what does that mean? Inside that mobile classroom, that, as Megan mentioned, you've got that universal screening and progress monitoring using Dibbles 8th edition, that highly researched partnership we have with the University of Oregon to share that and bring that to you, to definitely provide enhanced assessment tools for your students. Once we are doing all of that assessment, we're going to then group things for you. And so that's some of the time-consuming work that you are already doing, taking that data and then determining those groups. We're going to group students for you and provide that targeted instruction based on those skills, especially in terms of our students needing that lowest level skill. We're going to highlight those skills. You know exactly what students need, and we're going to provide that targeted, explicit, systematic instruction that Megan talked about. With that, in MCLASS, you're going to have dyslexia screening measures. So it's not just about the Dibbles 8th measures. You're going to have additional measures that are going to support you in terms of determining what else my students need in terms of the risk. All of that reporting we talked about with the stakeholders, from parents to district level administrators, all of that reporting is available. But within the actual platform, there are some additional tools, and we're not going to go into depth on those today, but we do like people to understand that it is a complete system with other tools available in terms of a 30-minute intensive intervention. And so if teachers and districts have that need, and have the personnel and have the ability to do a 30-minute daily intervention, we have that tool for you, as well as we've got MCLASS Express, and which is a student reading and recording in the text reading online, as well as decoding online. So there are different measures that can be used, as well as Lectura, which is back to school 2022, ready to go for kindergarten through 6th grade. And that's really working to assess your native speakers of Spanish, your bilingual students. It's really neat you're using MCLASS Dibbles 8th and Lectura, because you'll get dual language reporting, which is really going to be a powerful tool for our tools. And then we do have math in K-3 that we'd be happy to share with you, because assessment covers a lot. And so with MCLASS D8, you're going to be seeing students produce those sounds, and there's a lot of power in a teacher actually seeing that in action, not hearing it or not seeing it from a report, but actually hearing a child not being able to produce those sounds and read. And again, with the simplicity of it, it's a 1-minute measure. And those are covering those foundational skills, those critical skills that we know in terms of that word recognition and those comprehension skills that we know students need to become proficient readers. As we've shared, the teachers trust it because they've actually administered it and they have seen the student right in front of them. With Dibble's 8th edition, you have the measures here on the left, starting with letter naming fluency all the way up to maze. I know there are teachers on the call that might be very familiar, but there are also folks on the call that may not know Dibble's at all. And so you can see from grade K to grade 6, the appropriateness of the measures. However, you can assess off grade level for progress monitoring. These are our benchmark assessments. These are the tools that you're going to use for benchmarking. However, you will use the same tools, which is really nice because you're very familiar with the administration and familiar with the reporting to be able to do, again, looking at those skills. Phonemic awareness, such a critical skill. We're going to assess those things with nonsense word fluency, the blending of sounds. We want to instruction that students are getting in core and apply it to an assessment to know how they're doing. Those additional screening measures, they vary from an online administration for students to teacher administered with rapid automatized naming and listening comprehension, our oral language screener. Now, 2 of these are used for our dyslexia screening, the spelling assessment and rapid automatized naming. And so as teachers and districts determine the needs, and again, states are kind of sharing that support for us in terms of what we need to be assessing for dyslexia screening, but you have the option of using these to your district's needs. And so they're something that your team of support will help you enable. What does it look like for teachers? They're going to have some kind of a device, whether it's an iPad or a Chromebook, laptop, really depends. It is optimized for a touch screen, as you can see with that iPad. Teachers are also going to have student materials and those can be printed very easily. They are available bound, but they're going to have that one set because they're going to use that all year. They're not making copies and doing any of that extra work, which is really nice. Again, simple. We want it simple. You're going to have a detailed reporting site where both administrators and teachers can see a variety of levels of reports, and then they can also download the data to be able to put into other systems. And so depending on what you're using, that's what you're going to have available to you, our reports or your access. We want you to use the data to be able to close those gaps. And we know, as Meagan shared in the beginning, those gaps are real, especially this year. And I think, we hate to belabor the issue, but they seem to keep expanding from the folks that we keep talking to, that and we want to make sure that you can identify those. The first thing is identification, right? We need to identify those gaps and then be able to remediate. One thing you'll also see is that progress monitoring is done within the same platform, within the exact same system that you're working. And in this case, you're seeing recommendations made. So sometimes we know how busy you are. I mean, Meagan and I talk to teachers all the time, and the fact that they are pulled in so many different directions, the progress monitoring recommendations that are made within the system based on your benchmarking and what you're doing on a regular basis are updated regularly. And so when you are assessing, you're going to get those recommendations from that composite score, from that benchmark score. You don't have to use our recommendations. If there are reasons that you want to look at different skills or need to for an IEP or other means, you can do that. But also the system tells you if there's some pattern that's happening that a student isn't making sufficient progress, maybe looking at your intervention or your explicit systematic instruction, looking at that, what's happening in the classroom or with remediation. And it'll also tell you if they're on track. So these tools are really supportive of teachers in terms of that progress monitoring, and it helps teachers. I'm going to actually show you a quick little video of what it looks like in action. Some of you may, if you're familiar with Dibbles, you might have seen something similar because you've got an iPad and you've administered. But for those of you that aren't familiar, our teacher on the left has her iPad in front of her. The student on the right, maybe some of you, if you are familiar with Dibbles, you might even be able to guess which assessment we're using because he doesn't have a probe in front of him. And so when we think about what is he going to have to do, he's going to have to listen and actually segment those phonemes. And so that's what we're working on, phonemic segmentation fluency. This is her screen, her iPad. We have our little friend, Mr. Say. If any of you are Pan fans, you might recognize what he looks like. He's telling her what to say. He's giving her those directions. So everyone has the same, there's a standardized administration. She's going to start reading, and we're going to listen to just a little bit of this. I want you to see what happens because the timer shows the 1 minute, and it also shows 3 seconds so that you're going to see that timer. It also tells you what time of year, what assessment is administered. So let's play Karen and Lee.
The sounds in the word am are Your turn. Tell me the sounds in the word am. Tell me any sounds you hear. Okay, here is your first word. For. Here.
Now you noticed he made an error, so she marked that error. The clock is ticking away. She's knowing what words are coming next. Top of the screen, our little Mr. Say is telling her that next word. What I really want you to see then, and I hope you see how simple it is to administer. With practice, teachers really get very familiar with the terminology. As we go to the end of the video, I want you to see the screen turns to yellow. It's at the 5 seconds before that assessment ends. It turns to yellow, so she is alerted to, hey, it's almost up. Be ready for it to end. She's going to hit where you see the word exit here. She's going to hit the word, it'll change to the words done and invalidate. So when she's done, she's going to click done, and I want you to see what happens after that because that's what teachers really appreciate.
Stop.
I've done my 1 minute assessment. And when I've done that 1 minute, boom, I immediately get the score. And remember, the actual assessment was phonemic segmentation fluency. We're working on phonemic awareness, and this child got a 23. If you can see the red tinge to the box, that's the well below benchmark. And so I immediately get that. So I immediately know what's happening with my student. The other thing is we're focused on the actual skills here. As Meagan shared how important it is to focus on those skills, those ones that are highlighted in the science of reading research. That's what we want to be aware of. How is he doing with phonemic awareness? Now, when I'm assessing this student, I'm now going to go to my nonsense word fluency because that's the next assessment. I'm going to click that button and it's going to take me to that assessment. Here is the screen where all of my students are actually starting. And so I've got my list of students and I can open any of them up. Now I want you to notice something. I referred earlier to the benchmarking and progress monitoring. Right now, I'm in my progress monitoring time frame. And so it actually defaults to progress monitoring. If we were in our benchmark window in my school district, you would see that benchmark open. So I'm going to click on benchmark so you can see what happens when I benchmark a screen. All of my assessments are loaded and I'm ready to go. If I were to have composite scores and I were to have progress monitoring, this is what I would see. You can see the assessments I've given, actually. I've given those progress monitoring probes. These are the scores. I can actually click on those and get the probe and see the probe results from that. I can select my measures. If I had a composite score, the benchmark score, it would actually recommend one of these measures, the lowest skill that I need to be working on. And that brings me to the other aspect. I'm going to go to my menu and I'm going to actually go to my reports because I go right to my reports from that screen. I get my report of my students. I've got my 15 kiddos. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I never had the good fortune of having only 15 students in my classroom. But this classroom, that's how many we have today. And so you can see I've assessed all 15 of them. I'm getting those scores and the skills identified at the top here for my whole class. This is the beginning of the year benchmark. If I want to look at middle of year, end of year, or compare them, I hit that summary button. Notice I haven't assessed at end of year. We have assessed at middle. I've got 10 kiddos that are well below or below benchmark. And now I've got 5 when I'm in the middle of the year. So I'm making progress. Let's jump back to that beginning of the year so I can see, because I want to see all my individual kiddos. And in this case, I scroll down, I've my whole class of students. It defaults to the sorting by last name. I personally want to sort by composite. And in terms of that composite score, I'm going to hit that button. It's going to give me those 10 kiddos that were at well below or below benchmark. So I can see who needs my most support. I don't have to. I can also see from the higher end, higher achieving students in terms of their scores. But let's jump back there, look at some of the data you see here. Some things we want to point out to you, your dyslexia screening measures come after your DIBELS 8th measures. So you've got your DIBELS 8th measures at the top, but on top of the measures, you've got the actual skills. We want to make sure teachers are focused on what are the skills my students need to be working on to become proficient readers. And it's going to start with that phonemic awareness. And so I can look at any of the probes. So I can open any of these up, see them. I can see where the student should be in terms of that bar. We call this the little running girl because she's running towards that, that blue line, that blue bar. And I make some anecdotal kinds of decisions here looking at this data, but then I'm also going to look, at historical data, or I can compare this to other data. So as I look at all of my students, and we're going to just jump to one of them and look at that benchmark history. So you have all the data. So if I'm a second grade teacher, I can go back and look at what in first grade. I can go back and look at students that, we've imported that data as well. In terms of the progress, I can look at what's happened over time for both progress monitoring as well as benchmarking. And these graphs, I can print them, I can share them with caregivers. But in this case, we're looking at from middle of year into beginning of year to middle of year. With phonemic awareness, if you notice, this is a skill that this student has been identified that needs to be progress monitored. So I am going to be looking at that skill and looking at what I can do to help this child. She started out well below benchmark. She is still making progress, but not where she needs to be. We need to get to that goal of 43. But I can look at all of those probes as well. So I've got this historical data. I can share it. Anyone can see it. Remember, we talked about that sharing of data, because my interventionist should be doing the same things that I'm doing in terms of that explicit systematic instruction, that remediation. If I go back to my class list, looking at one other small item that you may have missed by looking at that screen, we've got a little alert here. You can see this little exclamation mark in a circle. That is our dyslexia screening indicator. Now, I am always super emphatic about the fact that this is not diagnosing dyslexia by any means. This is alerting you to which students were identified at the risk of reading difficulties based on their composite score of well below benchmark and either their spelling or their RAN. So you see these students at the top, spelling and RAN. Notice here, spelling only and RAN only down here. Identified these students. Now, I've got all my data. What do I do? Well, this is where the time starts coming in. What do I do with all the data? How do I start helping my kiddos? I immediately can look at the top of my screen, jump to instruction, and I can see all of my students in groups. I can see my students individually. And so maybe I want to start with individual students and looking at each child and looking at the observed patterns on all of the probes that were administered. So this gives me a great sense of what's happening with each child. It also gives me a nice little paragraph that I can share with a caregiver or on a report card, because I don't have to go in detail on that data. I jump back to my groups though, because that's what I really want to do to save time. I need to address skills of student needs in the most time efficient way. And so now I've got my phonemic awareness group, my decoding group, a second decoding group because we're identifying different skills that need to be identified, and then comprehension. So you can see all 15 of my kiddos are put into different groups based on that lowest level skill that was identified through my composite testing. Now, if I open this up, I can immediately see pedagogical considerations, language considerations, for language variety considerations. If I've got students from using different languages, coming from a different language background, this gives me a lot of information. And teachers don't always have access to this. So you can see this language varieties influence on phonological awareness. These are recommendations for teachers to understand more of the language background of their students. But if I scroll down, I've got the observed patterns on the skills that the students are working on within that decoding group. Now, I've got activities identified, but the other thing I want to notice is that, and this is where we're going to take you back into the system to say, where would I go in CKLA to work on those skills? Where have I introduced or am I going to review or do some remediation? So it is tied to what you're doing in your core. And then it's definitely going to provide those tools for you to be able to remediate. Now, when we look at those activities are going to be explicit and systematic in nature. The I do, we do, you do. Same thing with your core. How am I supporting kids? By giving them explicit instruction. And so you can see these can be printed, they can be shared with others. It's a warm up, it's modeling, and then guided practice. We provide you word lists to work on that, those phonemes that we're identifying. And these are there for you to use within that intervention time or within that small group time. Everything has been identified for you. Now, with that, you want to talk to parents, right? You want to be able to share that. You also want to be able to get all those activities so you can identify and get those activities based on skills that you're looking for. But when you want to connect with those folks at home, your caregivers, you want to share what's happening in a very caregiver-friendly way. And with that, you're going to be able to talk to them about those skills that students need. And it is asking, can your child identify the first, middle, and last sound in the word sun? And so again, it's all about phonemic awareness because we know that skill is such an important piece. Now, back to MCLASS. I don't know if you noticed in the upper right-hand corner here, we've got two tabs here where I can hit Amplify Reading, Intervention. Earlier, I talked about intervention as a standalone 30-minute intensive daily path. That's where teachers would go if they are using Amplify MCLASS intervention. And Amplify Reading, Meagan's going to share with you how all of this connects, how the data that we are collecting, how this benchmark data and the progress, how this is helping guide your Amplify Reading. And so she's going to start sharing about those connections in the teacher dashboard that teachers are going to have based on that MCLASS data, that wonderful, rich DIBELS composite score.
You know what, Karen, you've done such a great job of just really diving into how easy it is to administer digital literacy assessments that are really measuring the critical skills in such a developmentally appropriate way. But one thing I always, and I can go back to my own experience in speaking and working with other teachers nationally, is when we really look at our assessment that we're utilizing and districts in our conversations with districts, it's like, well, tell us how your teachers or tell us how you are using that data to inform your instruction, right? What is that data really telling you? And so what's interesting or what's really phenomenal and so remarkable about MCLASS is that it actually gives teachers this really effortless way to not only group their kids with those like skills deficiency in such instant, right? Like you can administer the assessment in the morning and have that data or that instruction in the afternoon. And the same thing goes for Amplify Reading. Last week, we really dove into Amplify Reading and looked at how Amplify Reading provides students practice and instruction that focuses on the skills that students need to become proficient readers. But even when looking at Amplify Reading today, after kind of diving into MCLASS actually places students seamlessly into Amplify Reading. So we think about the lift that teachers have when it comes to just core instruction and all the things. And MCLASS uses that data to not only give teachers a way to remediate the specific skills that students are demonstrating deficiencies in, but also, what about those kids who are out of reach, right? Like, we talk about small group instruction, but what are the kids who are doing, what are the kids who are not working with the teacher doing? And that's really where Amplify Reading came in. And in fact, MCLASS Dibble's eighth data actually just places students right into Amplify Reading. And as an Amplify Reading teacher, I can actually see my Dibble's composite scores here when I'm actually checking my students' progress on Amplify Reading. And so this is something that, just really ties in how both systems really speak to one another, but it really goes back to that reading research that we focus on so much here at Amplify, and take, are honored to be a part of those conversations and really pave the way for educators building more capacity around science of reading research. And so with all of that being said, if you are interested in learning more about MCLASS D8, please visit amplify.com/programs/MCLASS so you can get an overview or dive more into some of the things maybe we didn't hit on as in depth today that you're interested in learning more about. I know that this is such a great resource for saving teachers time and really providing them a way to use that data really intentionally, and providing every teacher and child with that equitable opportunity to do that. But also, as you continue this science of reading journey, and really looking at the critical skills, making sure that our core instruction is aligned to that, to science of reading research, as well as our assessment and our practice that students are doing when they are out of reach. And you want to continue learning about this research in an accessible way. If you aren't already a podcast listener, be sure to join our Science of Reading podcast, hosted by our very own Susan Lambert, where you can hear a variety of experts from the field really dive into every strand of the reading rope and talk about why it's so important that we do make these shifts and really evaluate our literacy system as a whole. And I know Karen has some of her favorites here when it comes to the Science of Reading podcast. So Karen, any recommendations for today's webinar?
Well, I probably give the same recommendation every time you ask, so I probably should come up with a new one. All I can say is every time that I listen to a recent podcast interviewee, it becomes a favorite, and it's so timely. And we've recently, I would say the most recent on multilingual students has been really eye-opening. There have been some really eye-opening podcasts recently.
And Karen, I'm so excited for MCLASS Lectora because of the parity between MCLASS Dibble's 8th edition and also having that opportunity to provide to Spanish-speaking students. But also, as you look at or continuing to dive into the science of reading, make sure you check out our Science of Reading website. Here you'll find really accessible resources that you may want to share as you continue this journey, really be that change agent in your district or in your school. It starts with one person, and we're excited for you to continue that journey here. And also our Science of Reading Facebook page. But Karen, we can sit here and we can present week after week or day after day, but really and truly the power and the people who really know about what it looks like when you evaluate your literacy system and start to implement research-based practices are educators themselves. And so we want to make sure we invite you to our upcoming webinar series. I know on Thursday, December 2nd, this Thursday, we're super excited to host district administrators from across the country to learn about their MCLASS and Amplify reading journey and how that's really transformed their district. And then also on December 9th, right, it's all about the core and going back to Amplify CKOA. So we definitely like for you to register there. And now we're going to open up the floor. I know that we had a question about, is this being recorded? And we did answer that in the Q&A. We also had a question about progress monitoring. And so Karen did answer that. So any other questions that you may have, feel free to put in the Q&A box. We also want to just thank you. Thank you for joining us and sharing your afternoon with us. Hopefully you had a great Thanksgiving break and didn't eat too much. And hopefully your kids have just jumped right back into the routine of things.
Definitely. Megan, I just want to share thank you to the folks that are on the call as well. And I would love to see people come to our MCLASS panel of educators, our CKLA panel. That's where you really get to hear that down and dirty implementation, get your questions. And our panelists are always so wonderful because they keep it real.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is nothing like hearing from educators who are using the program. And we just had something come in the chat about the Science of Reading book. But I'm wondering if Melanie, maybe you want to clarify if you're talking about the Science of Reading website. Here is that Science of Reading website. There we go, Karen pasted it in. So, and Melanie, if this isn't what you're looking for, just let us know and we can get you what you are interested in.
So much worth in terms of worthwhile reading on that website. I would say the podcast. Every time I talk to teachers who are subscribing to the podcast, they can't speak highly enough about what they're learning and how the kind of professional development. I've heard people, it's the best professional development they've ever had. Yeah, our own Susan Lambert does a fabulous job with the questions and interviewing those folks. So yes, that's a great place to start too.
Yes, absolutely. We had a great question come up in the Q&A, Karen. Shannon Ryan asked about how long does it take to assess a student? So if you want to share that with Shannon, we can definitely do that.
Yeah. So when you think about those assessments that I shared with the benchmarking, it's going to be, they're 1-minute assessments. So if you've got 4, when you look at each grade level by itself, you're just going to add up the time for that. So in terms of your kindergarten or your early grade, you've got 4 minutes, but you also have to think about the little transition time, from instructions and again, teachers decide. Some teachers will assess all of one probe before they move to the next one. Some teachers will assess one student first in the entirety. That really varies. The one measure that is MACE, and that is a 3-minute assessment. And so when you look at grades 2, 3, 4 through 6, the upper grades, that's a 3-minute assessment, but the teacher is actually not having to do that because the students are doing the reading and answering the questions. And so that's independent of the teacher. So it varies by grade level, and there are some gating rules. So we didn't talk about that. Dibble's 8th edition, the research behind it is phenomenal, and there is some time saving with that. So that's a great thing to look at, because if your students aren't quite ready, it will identify that, and then we are not going to put one of the assessments in front of them. You do have the ability to ride those assessments, or those gating rules, I should say, so that you can assess on every measure that you need based on your needs of the district. The other thing is you've got your progress monitoring, and those are you're usually going to give one progress monitoring measure, and that's going to be 1 minute. And so that becomes a really quick process for teachers. They get very familiar with that. I don't know, Megan, if you have anything to share about that.
No, Karen, I think that you hit it spot on. I know that I'm sorry.
Probably more than they wanted to hear.
No, I think it's been great. I think when we have such a great turnout on these webinars, it's because of just the moment in time that we're all a part of. And the moment in time that we're all a part of when it comes to really evaluating our current practices, diving into the research. And Karen, it's amazing that, reading research is just so accessible today. And how many educators are really just grabbing the bull by the horns and leading the charge of really building capacity in this way. I saw that we had something come up in the chat. Let's see. Okay, the December webinar date. So what we'll do is actually just put that landing page in the chat. This Thursday on December 2nd is where you can actually hear from the MCLASS and Amplify reading users. And then on December 9th, there we go. On December 9th, we'll actually hear from CKLA users, CKLA teachers.
All right, so do we have, I think I see one more question come in. How, no. So with K-2, in terms of comprehension, with grade 2, you are giving MAIS. And so MAIS is done at grade 2. In terms of K-1, you're doing oral reading fluency. And I have heard teachers ask students to share a retell. That is not a required part of answering or addressing that, but it is something that teachers do frequently do. We are really focused again at K-1 in terms of those lower level skills, those foundational skills that are the crux, the what we know students have to be able to build towards that deeper level of comprehension. And maybe Meagan, you have something to share too.
Yeah, I think this is a great question, because when we think about the foundational skills and just the cognitive energy that it takes for kids as they're really becoming skilled in their decoding, making sure those skills are just so sound and so solid is really key and critical, because that's what enables that energy, that cognitive energy, to really be freed up, to really comprehend what you're actually lifting off of the page or what you're decoding. And so that's why it kind of comes in that second grade mark with MAIS, to determine, because students have had enough foundational skills instruction to really start to make that transition from learning to read as they're, or reading, like as they're learning how to read in terms of decoding, but really making that shift to actually being able to read, to learn on their own independently with text in front of them. So Karen, I hope that's what you were looking for.
And something I'd like to add, because the question comes up and sometimes with that K-2 range, and in terms of the oral reading fluency and the Dibble's 8th edition research, why there is no retell. We'd love to share with you the background on that, because of the research that shows that it wasn't as effective in terms of understanding what kids really knew, because more language rich kids sometimes did better, but it didn't mean that kiddos that didn't share a long retell didn't necessarily comprehend. They might not have been as language rich, and we know with the science of reading, that's such an important piece, having that oral, the ability with that oral language. So we'd love to share that research with you too, from the University of Oregon. And
Yeah,
Meagan, I don't
absolutely.
have questions.
You know what? I don't see any more questions, but what a great group you all have been, and it's been great to see some familiar names. And that's what ends up happening, right? We start on the science of reading journey with Amplify, maybe one of our programs or literacy tools are just really building capacity, and then we end up noticing different pieces of our literacy system that really need some improvements. And so thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you again soon, maybe even this Thursday.
So Meagan, I just answer one more question in a typed out form. And I think we covered it. And yeah,
Awesome.
Please join us again. We always love to just see people from across the country. And again, those warm spots, keep them coming to the calls.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great evening, everyone. Enjoy.
Have a great night, everyone.